I'm gonna sound like a chud.
Hello and welcome back.
I'm Keira Martin.
And I'm Newlin, and this is a dialogue for the dehumanized. Now, as you can tell from our outfits and this new laptop and microphone, we've gotten some upgrades, and this is thanks to our
One new viewer.
Yeah.
Miss Settle.
Thank you. Yeah. So we made it out. We made it out. Yeah. The podcast grind. We finally we're rich. We're famous. And now we can afford all this. So, thank you, Miss Settle. Now, moving on to our central question. On today's episode, we'll be talking about the pedagogy of the oppressed and how does gaining knowledge allow for individuals or a society to see the sun outside of the cave of oppression. So, why is it necessary to be aware of the lack of humanity and the possession of humanity in yourself and others at all times?
Well, that's a great question. In Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Paulo Freire expresses how the only way to escape the cycle of oppression and oppressed is to recognize humanity in both the oppressed and the oppressor, as described in our last episode. However, there's a step further. Simply recognizing humanity in the two positions and escaping one cave isn't enough to truly liberate oneself or others from the chains of oppression. For instance, once someone escapes one cycle of oppression, there will naturally always be another instance of the cycle. To add on, humans naturally fluctuate between oppressed and oppressing and liberation. For instance, someone may be oppressing themselves, saying that, I will never need to know what we're learning in this class, so I won't study it. Later, they may realize their mistakes and study that material. After escaping that cave, they unknowingly fall into another one and think that they should study the material for a singular test and forget it, falling into another cave of ignorance. In the allegory of the cave, Socrates explains the cave and how enlightenment is tied to wisdom and knowledge. It can also be inferred that there's a never-ending cycle of enlightenment. Once you escape the cave, there is still a new perspective to know. There is still more to learn, so the best way to overcome the cycle is to always adapt and be open to new perspectives and knowledge. Now, I want to tie this in to another text that we read in class, and that text is What to the Slave is the 4th of July by Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass escaped his initial cave of oppression, but he now must escape another cave. He demonstrates his oppressor's point of view and pointed out their humanity while expressing his own. In the end, this reinforces the idea that there will always be a lingo between enlightenment and oppression. The only way to move forward is to perceive humanity in everything. Now, I wanted to ask you a question. How can revolutionary leaders overcome barriers made by oppressors to unite the oppressed?
That's a very good question. So, revolutionary leaders can overcome barriers made by oppressors through subtle notions and gradual increase in dialogue regarding liberation. Furthermore, Paulo emphasizes the importance of creating intimate and meaningful relationships with the working class you intend to educate and be educated alongside, rather than speaking shallowly to masses or spewing propaganda on communiques. Although initially appearing to be the most efficient way of achieving an egalitarian society, this method is most effective because it avoids loose and radical measures that may lead to unnecessary violence or costs, whilst maintaining at its core the focus of achieving a more just and equal society. Now, in connection to the allegory of the cave, this method proposed by Paulo Freire offers an alternative ending to the one proposed by Plato in the allegory of the cave, where the fleed prisoner who attempts to enlighten his peers in shackles is met only with murder and retaliation. Although the revolutionary leaders and the fleed prisoner may parallel in their intent, what Freire does differently here is he understands the importance of a subtle, gradual revolution.
That was a great response.
Boom!
And now I want to ask you another question. How does the problem-posing system of education begin a journey towards liberation or the sun?
That's an awesome question, man. Alright. The problem-posing system of education begins a journey toward liberation, or the sun, through allowing oneself to immerse themselves in knowledge that is directly beneficial towards their problems at hand. This allows them to kill two birds with one stone, as it not only motivates the student to learn at an accelerated rate to solve whatever problems they may be facing, but it also allows them to achieve greater confidence and self-awareness of their situation. This results in a positive feedback loop, where one begins to question more, to which they seek more knowledge, to which they question more, to eventually achieving conscientization, or critical consciousness. Conscientization is the goal of problem-posing education, where one is entirely aware of the current socio-political situation, how they fit within said situation, and what they can do to reform it for the better, which Paulo calls praxis. Now, in relation to the allegory of the cave, through an equilibrium of conscientiz chao and its relationship with praxis, problem-posing education successfully leads students to the sun. Considering the symbolism of glaring directly into our yellow dwarf being that of ultimate acceptance and realization of one's previous ignorance and newly acquired knowledge, it is made evident that conscientiz chao and praxis directly parallel this aspect of the allegory. What does a dialogue do to a student's mind in education, and how does a dialogue reflect the journey to seeing the actual sun?
Another great question. Where are you getting these questions?
My brain.
Our producer, Andreia.
No, it's my critical consciousness.
Our producer, Andreia.
It's my critical consciousness, guys.
And what is that in Portuguese?
Conscientiz chao.
Other words, our producer, Andreia.
This video is sponsored by Keira.
Dialogue reflects their journey to the sun because it allows the individual to get their eyes adjusted to the light of the actual sun. Or in other words, the truth as expressed in the allegory of the cave. Discussion is the primary tool used to learn how to be comfortable in the discomfort of change. And I would also like to connect this to a text we read in class. In the passage, George Eliot, Unsigned Review in Leader, George Eliot describes how the best educators do not aim for passing knowledge on to students, but rather producing a mental condition which renders acquirements easy and leads to their useful application. This reinforces the idea that real knowledge and education relies on the mindset rather than the base knowledge obtained.
Anyways, moving on to you, Keira, I have a good question for you.
And what's that?
If the sun is the true reality, what is the importance of truth and dialogue between people in an oppressive society?
First off, horrible question. I'm just joking. But the dialogue between people in an oppressive society leads people to the sun, or in other words, the truth by helping people understand and comprehend what they're learning. For instance, in the allegory of the cave, the prisoners were able to talk. However, it was limited to the shadows they were seeing on the wall, insinuating it's not a real dialogue. Only after a prisoner was released from their chains were they able to have a free discussion that led them to see the true light that the fire was in.
Keira, I'd like to stop you right there because I need to talk about today's sponsor for the podcast, the Rage Box. So, I think as you all have seen my commercial last year on the Rage Box. It's been a personal project for a while, extremely successful. It cures your rage.
You've been talking about this for years. It's not gonna launch.
It's gonna launch, Keira.
What you just saw was me before the Rage Box. With the Rage Box, my life has changed. And instead of telling you what this thing can do, I'm going to show you what this thing can do. You stupid freaking controller! So buy now my upcycled, amazing controller.
You don't know what I'm capable of. This is the future. This is the past. This is just a medium to make all the money in the world through the Rage Box. Don't you know that's what this has always been for?
I thought you just wanted to talk about philosophy and literature with me.
Philosophy and literature? This is the philosophy and literature. This is life. This is everything to me. Watch. When I'm angry, I scream at it. Ah! 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 See? That was amazing. It's the Rage Box. Everybody loves the Rage Box. I love the Rage Box. She loves the Rage Box.
No, I don't.
Yes, you do. Then what is this podcast for, huh?
To talk to our audience about philosophy and literature.
Do you really think that's what it's for? Do you think we're just here to talk and do good things and make a good influence on these people?
Yes.
No! We're here to make money! Money, 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 money! I want money! I want money! Maybe at the start, it was kind of that. But after we made money, everything changed, Keira. My perceptions changed. This is meaningless. Everything's meaningless if you don't have the coin, the money.
You're stuck in your own cave.
What cave? You're stuck in the cave. You're stuck in your hobo cave. You are broken. I'm rich. Anyways, now moving on to the recap. Today we discuss. I'm trying to think of the right voice for this. Yeah. All right, to recap this epic podcast episode, today we discussed the overarching theme of how gaining knowledge allows individuals to see outside the cave. We also discussed how it is necessary to see humanity wherever you can, how leaders overcome barriers made by oppression, how changing the education system may lead to liberation, the importance of truth and dialogue, and finally, how dialogue represents the journey to seeing the sun expressed in the allegory of the cave. That's all for today, folks!
Thanks for tuning in to an episode of Dialogue for the Dehumanized. For more information about our podcast, please go check our Instagram at Dialogue for the Dehumanized, or go check our website, which is linked on our Instagram.
That was really long.
Yeah.
But today's video is sponsored by the Rage Box Sushi Pocket. I hate this.
We hate all of our viewers, except for Miss Settle.